Hi guys. Tonight we travel back, far back to a time when the cold wasn't just uncomfortable, it was a matter of life or death. Picture this. You stand in a medieval village somewhere in northern Europe. Your breath blooms white in the air, and frost clings to the edge of every timber beam like powdered sugar. The ground crunches beneath your boots, and you realize there's no central heating, no cozy electric blanket waiting for you. If you can't build warmth, you simply won't last the winter. You probably won't survive this, honestly. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you do, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Now, dim the lights. You push open the heavy wooden door of a small cottage. It groans like an old ship, and the smell of smoke and damp straw greets you. The hearth glows weakly in the corner, its embers more orange than red. Around it, shadows flicker like half-remembered dreams. The family inside huddles close, wrapped in wool cloaks patched so many times, the original fabric has long disappeared. A dog curls at their feet, his tail thumping softly on the dirt floor. The air hums with quiet endurance. You can almost feel the cold pressing in from every side. The walls are made of wattle and daub, a simple lattice of woven twigs coated with mud, straw, and animal dung. It's not glamorous, but it works. Mostly. When the wind howls through the village, you hear it whistle through gaps and cracks that no amount of moss can truly seal. The floor is just packed earth, swept smooth by countless feet. Historians still argue whether the average peasant house retained much heat at all. Some claim it was barely warmer inside than out, while others suggest that the combination of low ceilings and constant smoke created a pocket of livable warmth near the hearth. You imagine crouching low, closer to the coals, where the air feels just a bit kinder. You run your hand along the rough beam above the doorway. It's darkened by centuries of soot, the grains smooth from the oils of hands long gone. In a world without insulation or double glazing, people built coziness through proximity, tight spaces, shared warmth, and clever design born of desperation. There's something deeply human about it, a kind of resourcefulness we've nearly forgotten. Outside, the world is a blur of white. Snow drifts against the cottage walls, and every sound seems muffled, as if the landscape itself is holding its breath. A rooster crows somewhere, confused by the eternal grey. You pull your cloak tighter, though it's more symbolic than useful. The wool itches, but that's part of the charm, isn't it? In the village square, smoke rises from a dozen chimneys, twisting upward in delicate ribbons that vanish into the sky. Somewhere, a blacksmith's hammer rings faintly, a dull, slow rhythm that speaks of endurance, not industry. Even the animals seem subdued, their breath steaming in the chill. You notice that many of the cottages share walls or sit close together, shoulder to shoulder, as if huddling for warmth. That wasn't just good neighborliness, it was strategy. Shared walls meant less exposure to the wind, less heat lost to the merciless outdoors. Here's a quirky truth. In some northern settlements, families built half-buried houses, digging into the earth itself to capture the ground's stable temperature. The Vikings, for example, often lived in longhouses whose thick turf roofs insulated like a cozy green blanket. You'd walk into one of those smoky halls and feel the temperature shift immediately, earthy, damp, but survivable. Back in your little cottage, the soundscape is intimate. The fire cracks softly, and someone stirs a pot suspended over the coals. The stew smells faintly of onions, cabbage, and salted pork, a simple recipe but rich with comfort. The baby, wrapped tight in linen, sleeps in a wooden cradle near the warmth. A mother hums quietly, her voice steady as the winter itself. You can almost hear the hiss of snow melting where it meets the outer wall, the creak of the thatch roof settling under weight. The house breathes. It leaks and groans and sighs, but it lives, and so do its people. As night falls, the world narrows. Beyond these walls, wolves might prowl or storms may roll in from the hills. But here, In this fragile sphere of firelight, you're safe. You understand now that coziness in the Middle Ages wasn't about plush comfort, it was about survival layered with small luxuries. A warm stone under your blanket, a mug of ale heated by the fire, the murmur of a familiar voice in the dark. One mainstream historical record, a 13th century English manorial survey, noted that peasants spent almost half their year repairing their own homes, patching roofs, redaubing walls, mending doors. It wasn't neglect. It was maintenance against the cold's relentless siege. Each repair was a small act of defiance. And yet, even among all this hardship, people found beauty. The flicker of candlelight across a polished pewter mug, the way frost caught on window lattices like lace, the soft glow of embers turning to ash. You can imagine laughter rising in that dim room, brief, human, necessary. Scholars debate how these simple homes shaped the medieval mind. Did living so close to nature, so near the edge of survival, make people more resilient or more fatalistic? The answer probably lies somewhere between the two. But what's certain is that these dwellings were more than shelter. They were testaments to adaptation, ingenuity, and a very human craving for warmth. You lean back, feeling the imagined heat of the hearth wash over your face. Your eyes grow heavy as the scene around you softens, the snow still falling, the village still breathing in its slow, smoky rhythm. You can almost drift off here, between fire and frost, between survival and sleep. Tomorrow, you'll step outside and explore how they built these homes from what the land gave them. But for now, just listen to the crackle, the wind, and the heartbeat of the hearth. Morning breaks softly, the kind of pale grey light that never quite becomes daylight in winter. You rise from your straw-stuffed bed, feeling the chill bite immediately at your toes. Every surface seems to exhale cold air. Outside, frost etches delicate feathers along the edges of the small window, and you can almost hear the silence of frozen fields beyond. It is time to think about what your home is made of, because comfort, in the medieval sense, starts with structure. You step outside, the air crisp enough to sting. Around you, the village is a living museum of materials. Timber frames groan with age, wattle panels bulge with uneven daub, and roofs slope low, thick with thatch. Each house looks as if it grew from the ground itself, patched together by human hands guided by instinct rather than blueprints. There are no architects here, only craftsmen and necessity. Wood is the skeleton of almost every home. In northern forests, oak was prized for its strength, though it could take a century to grow a single beam. Pine and birch filled the gaps where oak was scarce. Peasants often scavenged driftwood from rivers or reused planks from older structures. You can imagine them felling trees with iron axes, dragging the logs home behind oxen, the sound of the sled scraping over frozen mud. Each timber is hewn by hand, square edges made with adzes and planes. You run your hand over one and feel the story in its grain, the uneven ridges of work done slowly, sometimes in the bitter cold. The beams are joined with wooden pegs rather than nails, because metal is costly. There is a quiet brilliance in that simplicity. Historians still argue whether these early joints were truly weatherproof, or if most homes leaked slightly at every seam. You suspect the latter, but perhaps that leakiness gave them character. Between the timbers lies the wattle, thin branches of hazel or willow woven together in a loose pattern. The daub comes next, a mixture of mud, straw, sand, and something less glamorous, dung. Yes, you heard that right. Animal dung. It added fibre and stickiness, holding the mixture together like medieval cement. Once dried, it became surprisingly tough, capable of surviving decades of storms. When you press your palm against the wall, it feels uneven, cool, and slightly crumbly. There's a faint scent that never leaves these walls, something earthy and animal, like a reminder of where you stand in nature's cycle. You might wrinkle your nose, but remember, to the medieval villager, this was the smell of security. A quirky tidbit from some Old English records tells us that in especially poor cottages, the daub mixture sometimes included human hair collected from combs. Nothing went to waste. Next, you tilt your gaze upward to the roof, thatched thick with straw, reed, or heather. The thatch is golden, layered so densely that water cannot easily seep through. Birds nest in it sometimes, and occasionally a curious hen might even roost there. But the thatch is more than quaint decoration. It is insulation, a barrier against snow and rain. When well laid, it lasts 20 or 30 years, though the ridges need frequent patching. In summer, it keeps out the heat. In winter, it traps what little warmth there is. Historians debate whether these roofs were as fire-prone as legend claims. Some argue that constant dampness from mist and rain kept them too moist to ignite easily, while others say a stray spark could burn a cottage to the ground in minutes. The truth probably depends on luck, skill, and how close the chimney sat to the thatch. The ground beneath your feet tells another story. Some villagers build directly on packed earth, while others raise their homes on rough stone foundations to keep out dampness. You kneel and touch the soil floor of one house. It is smooth, tamped down by generations of feet. A thin layer of rushes covers it, changed only when the smell becomes unbearable. You might grimace at that, but to them, it was normal. Rushes could be perfumed with herbs like lavender or sweet flag to freshen the air. A fragrant médiéval compromise. You wander further into the village. Some houses are timbered, but others are entirely stone. These are often found in regions where rock is plentiful and wood is scarce. You trace a finger along the rough stones of a wall. The mortar between them is coarse, gritty, mixed with lime and sometimes animal blood to strengthen the bond. It feels ancient, durable, cold. In one corner, you find a structure partly dug into the ground. It looks strange, half buried like an animal den. These were the homes of the poorest or the cleverest, depending on how you look at it. The earth itself provided insulation, trapping warmth inside. You duck your head into the low doorway and feel the difference instantly. The air is still, almost humid, carrying the scent of soil and smoke. A dog watches you from the shadows, unbothered. Each region shaped its houses to the land's temperament. In the north, thick walls and low ceilings preserved heat. In the Mediterranean, wide courtyards and open fireplaces allowed air to circulate. Even within one village, every home whispered its own adaptation. You can almost sense a quiet competition. Whose roof leaks less, whose hearth smokes least, whose rushes stay driest longest. There's something deeply human about this variety. Every house, no matter how humble, was a personal equation of survival. You find yourself admiring their ingenuity. They built not from instruction manuals, but from memory, observation, and rumor. Someone discovered that dung mixed better with clay than sand. Someone else found that moss between timbers blocked wind. These small experiments became tradition, passed through centuries like family recipes. You pause by a pile of logs stacked neatly against a wall. They are damp, heavy, and precious. Every log represents hours of work. The cutting, drying, hauling. Fuel is everything. Without it, a house is just a frozen shell. But that story belongs to another section. For now, it is enough to see how deeply people listened to their landscape, how they turned forests, fields, and animals into shelter. A curious debate lingers among scholars about how colourful these homes once were. Today, we imagine them as drab brown huts, but traces of pigment found in medieval plaster suggest some walls were painted in cheerful shades of red or yellow. Imagine walking through a frosty morning village, and instead of dull mud huts, you see splashes of ochre and limewash glowing against the snow. It feels almost modern, doesn't it? A touch of brightness against endless grey. As evening creeps closer again, you look back at the little village. The rooftops steam faintly where fires burn inside, each plume of smoke curling skyward in a slow dance. The buildings huddle close, united against the cold. From a distance they look fragile, but when you stand among them, You sense their stubborn endurance. These homes were not built to impress. They were built to outlast the storm. The snow begins to fall again, soft and steady, wrapping everything in silence. You draw your cloak tight, feeling grateful for the lessons hidden in mud and timber. You can almost hear the whisper of ancient hands at work, the rhythm of survival carried in every beam and stone. The morning light slides weakly across the frozen roofs as you wander through the quiet lanes again. Every breath still clouds the air, but now you look closer, noticing the details of how these homes touch the earth and reach toward the sky. In the medieval world, a home's survival depended as much on what lay beneath it as what stood above it. The ground was both a friend and an enemy, a damp and restless thing that could steal warmth if you did not build with care. You crouch to run your fingers along a house's foundation. The stones are uneven, pressed together without mortar in places, more puzzle than precision. They rest directly on soil that shifts and freezes. Some stones are slick with frost, others dusted in pale moss. These foundations are low, rarely more than knee-height, but they matter. They lift the house just enough to keep the rain from seeping in. Peasants did not have luxury materials or trained masons, so they built by instinct and community wisdom. Historians still debate how effective these rough foundations were. Some suggest they made little difference. That dampness still crept upward to rot the wooden posts. Others believe they worked surprisingly well when combined with sloping floors and thick layers of rushes inside. You can imagine the villagers arguing about it too, one swearing by stone, another trusting the warmth of packed earth. You stand and look at the roof lines. Every roof is a signature of the land. In colder northern regions, they pitch sharply to shed snow. In milder places, they flatten slightly, allowing a man to climb up and patch the thatch when needed. Some are weighted down with stones or wooden pegs to hold the straw against the winter wind. You hear the soft rustle of a sparrow nesting in one corner, a reminder that even birds seek warmth here. The roof is not just shelter from snow or rain. It is insulation. Layers of thatch can reach 2 feet thick. Beneath it, an inner ceiling of woven twigs or wooden planks traps rising smoke and keeps the warmth close. You look up inside one cottage and see that the rafters are black with soot, the wood polished by smoke and time. There is no chimney, only a small hole in the roof or a louver that can be opened when the smoke becomes unbearable. The air inside feels heavy and warm, like breathing through wool. A quirky detail often surprises modern visitors. Medieval ceilings were rarely flat. They sloped, dipped, and bowed with the weight of time. Builders had no measuring tools to ensure perfect symmetry. Yet somehow, those warped beams gave homes a strange beauty, a sense of softness that straight lines could never offer. When you lie down at night and look upward, the uneven wood seems almost alive, bending protectively over you. The floor beneath your feet tells its own tale. Most villages had dirt floors, but the more fortunate might lay planks of oak or elm. Wood kept you slightly drier, though gaps allowed cold drafts to sneak through. To soften it, people spread rushes, straw, or even herbs. Records mention rush floors scented with mint, marjoram, or lavender. The scent must have mingled with smoke and stew, creating an earthy perfume that spoke of life and labor. You bend and pick up a piece of rush. It feels brittle, whispering as it breaks. In grander houses or castles, the floors might be of stone. That sounds impressive until you stand barefoot on one. The chill cuts through you like a knife. Wealth bought space and status, not necessarily warmth. The trick was in layering thick rugs, animal skins, wooden platforms raised above the cold slabs. You might envy the nobility's stone halls, but on a night like this, the peasant's smoky hut feels far more human. Outside, you notice how houses lean slightly inward, their walls bowing from centuries of freeze and thaw. Some are propped with rough beams, others patched with fresh daub that has not yet dried. The village is a living organism, forever being repaired. When storms rip off part of a roof, everyone helps rethatch it. When frost cracks a wall, neighbors bring buckets of mud to mend it. Building is not a single event here. It is a rhythm, a seasonal act of community. You pause near a house that looks newer, its wood pale and raw. The builder used a clever trick called cruck framing, two curved timbers joined at the top to form an arch, like the ribs of a whale. These frames supported the roof and distributed weight evenly, even on soft ground. Historians still discuss whether this technique first appeared in England or France, but it spread widely, admired for its grace and strength. You tilt your head, following the line of the beams, and realize that this shape would echo in architecture for centuries. Beneath the surface, the ground plays more roles than one might think. In some cold regions, people dug cellars directly under the floor, storing root vegetables and salted meat where frost could not reach. The air down there smells of soil and salt, of quiet endurance. You picture someone descending with a candle, wrapped in wool, the flame trembling as cold breath rises from below. The house is not just a shelter but a layered machine of survival, balancing warmth above and preservation below. A curious tidbit from Scandinavian folklore says that people sometimes buried charms or small animal bones under the foundation to protect the home from spirits of frost. Whether superstition or comfort, it shows how deeply the earth figured into medieval imagination. The line between structure and spirit blurred easily in a world that still whispered with unseen forces. As afternoon fades, you step away from the village, climbing a small rise. From here, the pattern of homes becomes clear. They seem almost to huddle together, backs turned to the prevailing wind, doorways facing east toward the morning light. The landscape dictates the plan. The placement of each house is not random but intuitive, born of generations, watching how snow drifts, how sunlight falls, how water drains after a thaw. You can feel that knowledge under your feet. Historians often argue about whether medieval builders thought consciously about thermal design. Some say they built only by habit. Others claim there was a quiet science to their craft, an understanding passed from father to son. You suspect both are true. Necessity teaches faster than theory. As the light fades, you return to one cottage. Inside, the hearth glows again. The smoke curls lazily through the rafters, tracing the lines of the roof like incense. You settle on a wooden stool, feeling the floor's slight slope under your feet, the walls pulsing faintly with warmth. Everything about this place feels handmade, imperfect, alive. The timbers creak as if stretching against the frost, and you imagine the house itself breathing beside you, a companion through the long, cold night. In that moment, you understand the genius of these humble structures. They were never meant to be permanent monuments, but living things that aged alongside their makers. Wood warped, daub cracked, roofs sagged, yet the homes endured. Each winter tested them, each spring renewed them. The fire pops softly, and outside, snow begins again, falling without sound. You rest your hand on the rough wall and close your eyes. You can almost feel the memory of all who built here, the echo of hammers, the rhythm of survival beneath your fingertips. Evening arrives early in the medieval world, and with it comes the soft glow of firelight spilling from open doorways. You push one of those doors gently and step inside. The air greets you with the thick perfume of wood smoke, half-burned oak, and something faintly metallic. This is the beating heart of every home, the hearth, the one invention that turned frost into comfort. Without it, there was no family life, no cooking, no survival. The hearth dominates the center of the single room. Stones blackened by years of flame surround a shallow pit filled with embers. Sparks leap upward lazily, painting the ceiling in ghostly streaks of orange light. A few children sit nearby, hands outstretched, faces glowing red from the warmth. Their mother stirs a pot hung from an iron hook, and the sound of the spoon against the rim seems louder than the wind outside. According to surviving records from the period, fire was both blessing and burden. It heated, cooked, and even protected against pests, but it also filled the air with choking smoke. With no chimneys in most peasant homes, the fumes collected under the rafters, staining everything dark. People learned to live with it, eyes watering, lungs adjusting, sometimes even sleeping half upright to breathe easier. One curious custom mentioned in local folklore says that families would open the roof louver only during daylight, believing that spirits might sneak in with the night air. So the evening smoke thickened, clinging to every surface, but the people felt safer wrapped in its haze. You sit near the fire and listen. The crackle is hypnotic, rhythmic, as if the flames themselves are whispering stories. Occasionally, a log collapses and sends a shower of sparks dancing upward. Someone coughs softly. The air is alive with tiny sounds. The hiss of sap, the creak of settling wood, the faint murmur of a lullaby. Medieval hearths were far more than sources of heat. They were altars of daily life. Children were baptized beside them, bread was blessed over them, and the sick were laid near them to recover. People whispered prayers to household saints or to street Brigid, guardian of the flame. A few burned sprigs of rosemary or juniper to drive out illness. Trusting the scent more than any doctor, the hearth became a sacred center where warmth met faith. Archaeological findings reveal that by the 13th century, some wealthier homes began experimenting with stone chimneys. The earliest examples appeared in monasteries and manors where masons could afford the skill. Yet even then, most villagers lived with open fires right on their floors. The soot darkened their hair and coated their walls, but to them, that darkness was a sign of life. A home without soot was a home without a heart. You glance at the simple tools laid beside the fire. A long poker, a flat stone for baking bread, a clay pot with a narrow neck. Each bears the marks of use, chipped edges and scorched handles. These were the instruments of warmth, passed down through generations. The smell of baking grain lingers faintly, mingling with damp wool and smoke. Experts continue to puzzle over the evolution of medieval fireplaces. Some believe the shift from central hearths to wall fireplaces changed social life entirely. With fire pushed to one corner, families no longer gathered in a circle but sat facing forward, as though domestic life itself had become more structured. Others doubt such tidy interpretations, arguing that warmth always finds a way to draw people close no matter the layout. Outside, a snowstorm starts to whisper against the roof. Inside, you watch the firelight flicker across the faces of the family. The father leans forward to add another log, and you see the muscles in his arm catch the glow for a moment before returning to shadow. He knows exactly how to stack the wood, so it burns long and steady through the night. It is knowledge learned not from books but from repetition, from the quiet ritual of survival. Here's an odd little fact you might enjoy. In some mountain villages, the hearth served another purpose: drying wet boots and curing meat. Hooks were hung from the rafters above the flames, suspending strips of bacon and strings of sausages in the smoky warmth. The result was both practical and delicious, even if the air grew heavy with the scent of grease. The firelight changes everything. Walls that looked drab by day now shimmer softly. The shadows pulse like breath. You feel time slowing down, as though the night itself stretches to watch the flames. Someone tells a story, voice low and rhythmic, and you realize this is how tales traveled before ink or parchment. History passed from one hearth to another, carried on the smoke. Many researchers continue to question whether early hearths were truly efficient. Experiments with reconstructed medieval houses suggest that much of the heat escaped straight through the roof. Yet the warmth that mattered most was not measured in degrees, but in closeness. Imagine a dozen bodies, human and animal, gathered around one flame, breathing together, sharing warmth until the air itself feels alive. As hours pass, the fire settles into embers. The mother uses a metal pan filled with coals to warm the bedding. The children giggle as she slides it under the blankets. The glow under the cloth looks like a secret sunrise. Soon they will rake ashes over the remaining coals to preserve them until morning. Matches do not exist. Every spark must be kept alive. To lose the fire is to start again from nothing. You sit a while longer, feeling the steady pulse of heat against your skin. The smell of smoke clings to your hair and clothes. The crackling fades into a slow hiss, like the sigh of an old friend. There is something ancient in this act, something that connects every age. The hearth is both technology and tenderness, invention and instinct. It is a fire you can still see reflected in modern candles, in stoves, in the soft hum of radiators on winter nights. Outside, the wind sharpens, but in here, the night is kind. The embers pulse red, steady as a heartbeat, and you know that as long as this glow endures, so will the people who built it. Dawn arrives like a grey whisper through the thatched roof. You wake to the smell of damp smoke and the faint crackle of a rekindled fire. The air still feels heavy with cold, and the first breath you take stings your throat. In the medieval world, warmth is never taken for granted. Keeping heat inside is as much an art as building the fire itself. You pull your cloak tighter and notice how the family moves through the same morning ritual, feeding the flames, patching the walls, rearranging the rushes on the floor to trap the night's fading warmth. According to old estate records, medieval builders understood insulation in a surprisingly practical way. They knew where the wind came from, how moisture traveled through walls, and which materials trapped air best. Without glass, foam, or proper bricks, they turned to what they had at hand. Straw, moss, animal hair, and even manure served as their secret arsenal against the cold. The idea was simple: fill every gap, no matter how small. A home was only as warm as its tightest seam. You crouch near the wall where fresh daub is drying. The mixture smells faintly of earth and hay. Someone has pressed bits of moss between the timber beams, green and soft like felt. When it hardens, the moss will seal the drafts that hiss through the cracks at night. A woman beside you hums softly as she works, her hands coated in mud. She does not think of it as insulation or construction. To her, it is a daily act of care. Archaeological findings reveal that some peasants layered their walls with woven mats of reeds before applying mud plaster, a primitive but clever technique that trapped air pockets inside. Others spread layers of dried manure on the outside, then covered it with fresh straw to disguise the smell. The result, surprisingly, worked. It was not elegant, but it was warm. Here's a curious detail from travelers' journals. In the colder parts of Eastern Europe, people sometimes mixed animal blood into plaster, claiming it made the walls both tougher and more resistant to frost. Whether that worked or not, the red tint it left gave cottages a strangely comforting hue, as if they glowed faintly even under snow. The windows, if you can call them that, are small slits covered with thin horn or oiled cloth. Light seeps through softly, turning the air gold and smoky. The coverings do not stop drafts completely, but they soften the wind's bite. When the sun rises high, villagers might remove them for a few hours to let in brightness before nailing them back at dusk. You trace your fingers along the frame and feel the rough fibers of linen stiff with oil. Experts remain divided on how effective these methods truly were. Some believe medieval homes lost heat faster than they gained it, that the fires merely slowed the inevitable chill. Others argue that the thick air inside, rich with smoke and human breath, created a microclimate that made the space surprisingly bearable. Whatever the truth, the people endured. They adapted not through technology, but through rhythm, habit, and persistence. You notice how every object in the room seems designed to hold warmth. Woolen curtains hang across doorways instead of wooden doors. Furs and old cloaks drape over sleeping benches. Even the ceiling beams are low, trapping heat closer to the ground. When the family gathers near the fire, their bodies form part of the insulation. The warmth does not belong to one person, but to all of them together. A delightful oddity preserved in some manor accounts describes how peasants stuffed goose feathers into small sacks and used them as rudimentary insulation around window gaps. The result was messy but surprisingly effective, though it probably made for many sneezing fits. Goose down was too precious to waste on luxury alone. It became a shield against the wind. You lean closer to the floor and lift a handful of rushes. They are freshly laid, still fragrant with herbs. Beneath them lies a layer of old straw, pressed flat over months of use. The smell is a mixture of soil, hay, and the faint sweetness of lavender. Every few weeks, the family replaces the top layer, shaking out the dirt and scattering new herbs. The rushes absorb moisture and soften the tread of cold feet. More than that, they create a barrier, however thin, between human life and frozen ground. Some researchers suggest that this layering of materials was a form of early thermal engineering. The same principle exists in modern insulation. Trapped air prevents heat from escaping. It is a quiet reminder that even without science, experience can build wisdom. People learned from touch and observation. They knew which walls stayed warm longest, which roofs dripped least, which moss smelled cleanest when burned. As the day wears on, you step outside into the pale light. The wind cuts hard across the village, but inside the cottages, smoke rises steadily from every hole in every roof. From above, it must look like a forest of breathing chimneys. The walls shimmer faintly with moisture that will soon freeze. You run your palm along one and feel a surprising warmth beneath the surface. Inside, the fire does its work, pushing back against the ice inch by inch. A small boy runs past carrying an armful of straw, his breath puffing like a tiny engine. He disappears behind a house where his mother is stuffing straw into the thatch's thin patches. It is a ritual repeated through centuries. The battle of warmth against wind. The roof sags a little, but the straw holds. When you tilt your head, you see the faint pattern of last year's repairs, a patchwork of seasons marked by human hands. Researchers interpret this pattern in contrasting ways. Some see it as evidence of endless poverty, proof that medieval life was nothing but toil. Others see creativity, a constant reinvention born from necessity. Standing here, you sense both. The people who lived in these houses did not merely survive. They designed comfort out of scraps, shaped security out of smoke and soil. Evening falls again. The fire inside glows like an eye through the cracks in the wall. You step closer, feeling heat on your face. The air smells of pine, resin, wool, and something sweet from the stew simmering inside. A dog curls by the door, keeping the warmth from escaping every time it opens. You realize that coziness is not about comfort but about persistence. Every handful of moss, every layer of straw, every bit of patched daub is an act of resistance against the cold. The villagers are not just surviving the winter, they are taming it, one smoky breath at a time. The wind sighs through the thatch, the walls hum quietly, and the hearth beats like a small heart within each house. You close your eyes, hearing the rhythm of this living architecture, soft, imperfect, and deeply human. By midday, the clouds hang low, swollen with the promise of more snow. You wander closer to one of the cottages, drawn by the strange beauty of its tiny windows. From a distance, they glimmer faintly, not quite transparent, not quite opaque, like sheets of pearl. When you stand close, you see that the panes are not glass at all. They are slices of horn, scraped thin until light passes through like honey through cloth. The glow they cast inside is soft and golden, almost like candlelight. Archaeological evidence from manor sites and urban dwellings shows that true glass windows were a luxury reserved for the wealthy well into the late Middle Ages. Even then, glass was small, brittle, and wildly expensive. Common folk relied on horn, oiled linen, or parchment to soften the wind while still admitting a hint of day. In winter, these coverings grew stiff with frost, their surfaces glittering like frozen rivers when the sun struck them. You duck inside and watch as a woman wipes the window cloth with a rag soaked in warm water. The air smells faintly of smoke and wet wool. The cloth softens for a moment, enough for her to see the pale outline of her husband chopping wood outside. Within minutes, it fogs again. She sighs and shrugs. This is the rhythm of winter, the dance between light and warmth. A curious custom once mentioned in local chronicles describes how people decorated their oiled cloth windows with painted patterns during festivals. They used soot mixed with egg yolk or chalk to draw stars, flowers, and even saints. The designs served no practical purpose, but in a season when the world outside was colorless, a bit of decoration was its own comfort. You step closer to the window and press your fingertips to its surface. It feels rough and waxy, and the light seems to pulse beneath your touch. Outside, snowflakes slide down slowly, catching on the edges where the linen overlaps. From within, it looks as if the world itself moves at half speed. Contemporary documents confirm that the size and placement of windows followed strict logic. Too large, and you invited the cold. Too small, and your home became a cave. In peasant homes, one or two narrow openings faced east or south to catch morning light. In northern regions, builders angled the frames to deflect the prevailing winds. You begin to realize that every choice, even the smallest one, was a quiet act of engineering. Inside the room, light bends around smoke like a living thing. The air shimmers gently, revealing the texture of every wall and the shape of every tool. Shadows pool in corners, deep and soft. A baby sleeps beside the hearth, his face dappled in that strange honeyed glow. The room looks timeless, almost eternal. Experts continue to puzzle over how medieval families balanced their need for light with their fear of losing heat. Some scholars argue that daylight was a luxury only used during work hours, that most homes stayed half dark even at noon. Others believe families kept small shutters ajar, trading a bit of warmth for a glimpse of the outside world. The truth may lie somewhere in between, shaped by personal taste, habit, and weather. You notice the wooden shutters hanging beside the window. They are thick, split from oak and fastened with rough iron hinges. When closed, they seal the light entirely, turning the house into a cave of sound and warmth. The surface is carved with faint patterns, circles, lines, something that looks like a star. You trace them with your finger and realize they might be charms meant to ward off spirits that travel on cold winds. Here's an unusual detail from a 14th century traveller's diary. In parts of Scandinavia, people placed small lumps of beeswax or animal fat along window seams, believing it not only stopped drafts but also repelled evil beings that crept in with the frost. The wax melted slowly from the heat of the fire and hardened again by morning, leaving strange, translucent shapes that glowed faintly at sunrise. The air inside smells of resin and candle smoke. Candles themselves are precious, made from tallow or beeswax depending on wealth. You watch a man carefully trim a wick with iron shears, his movements slow and deliberate. The faint flame flutters, painting the horn window in trembling light. For a moment, it feels as though the fire and the window are speaking to each other, one sending light, the other catching it. It is widely agreed among historians that these small openings shaped the daily rhythm of medieval life. Morning work began with the first thin beam of sunlight, and evening came when the windows faded into shadow. The darkness was not feared, it was accepted, even cherished. Families told stories, spun wool, mended clothes by the fire's glow. The world outside vanished, and the home became its own universe. You sit quietly, listening to the muffled world beyond the walls. The snow outside makes everything sound distant, softened, as if time itself has slowed. The light through the horn pane shifts as clouds move across the sky, and each subtle change seems profound. You realize how deeply the people of this age must have attuned themselves to light, how much meaning a sliver of brightness could hold. One rather charming detail from that era is the tradition of cutting small peepholes in shutters so that families could watch for travelers or check the weather without letting in too much air. The holes were often covered with thin leather or waxed parchment. In some villages, children were told to keep an eye on those holes for wandering spirits or for the return of a loved one. You can almost imagine a child pressed against the wood, peering through, breathing little clouds onto the cold surface. As the afternoon fades, the light thins until it becomes the color of old silver. Inside, the family moves quietly, as if unwilling to disturb the fragile warmth that the fire and the windows have conspired to create. The mother lowers the shutter and hooks it with a small latch. The world outside disappears completely. Now the only light is firelight, soft and steady, licking at the edges of iron pots. The walls glow gently, and for a moment you can forget the snow pressing against them. The window becomes a mirror, reflecting the family's movements in shades of orange and brown. The house feels smaller, warmer, more alive. You find yourself thinking that perhaps the beauty of these homes lies in what they hold back: the cold, the wind, the vastness of night. The thin horn panes, the oiled linen, the hand-carved shutters are not signs of poverty but of intimacy. Everything here is close. Light, air, warmth, life. The snow falls harder outside, tapping softly against the shutter. The room breathes in rhythm with the storm, quiet but unyielding. You watch the light fade and listen as another log catches fire, sending a flicker through the dark. It feels, somehow, perfect. The night grows deeper, and the fire burns low. You stretch your legs and glance around the dim cottage, now quiet except for the faint rustle of straw. Sleep is a precious thing in winter, and everyone prepares for it carefully. The air smells of wood, smoke, wool, and human closeness. As the last light fades, you begin to understand that in the medieval world, the bed was not just a place to rest, but a fortress against the cold. According to records from medieval households, even the poorest families built some form of raised bedding to escape the chill of the earthen floor. Sometimes it was a simple wooden frame filled with straw, hay, or dry leaves. The wealthier might stuff theirs with wool or feathers if they could afford them. You kneel beside one such bed and run your fingers through the straw ticking. It feels coarse but clean, giving off a faint, grassy scent that reminds you of summer fields long gone. The bed sits close to the hearth, almost within reach of the glowing embers. Two heavy blankets lie folded at the foot, one woven from wool, the other from rough linen patched many times over. The weight of them is comforting, like being wrapped in memory. On winter nights, people layered everything they owned, from old cloaks to animal hides, until they formed a cocoon of warmth. One unusual practice noted by travelers was the habit of sleeping several to a bed. Parents, children, and sometimes grandparents shared a single space, pressing close for body heat. Even livestock might be brought into the same room, separated only by a low partition. The sound of a cow's slow breathing or a sheep's soft shuffle became part of the night's rhythm. To modern ears it might seem crowded, but to them it was the sound of life enduring. You can almost feel the texture of the wool against your skin, scratchy but soothing in its roughness. Beneath the blanket, you imagine the heat of another person close by, the quiet warmth of breath and heartbeat. It is a comfort no hearth alone can give. The family lies together in a tangle of limbs and dreams, their shared warmth keeping the frost at bay. Archaeological findings reveal that in some colder regions, people built wooden sleeping boxes, small enclosed platforms with sliding panels. Inside, the sleepers were cocooned completely, their breath condensing on the wood. The design kept out drafts and trapped body heat efficiently. If you peered into one of those boxes, you would see a faint glow from the fire filtering through cracks, like starlight in miniature. Some experts believe this habit of enclosed sleeping inspired later designs of canopy beds, where curtains could be drawn around the sleeper. The concept of privacy was rare, but the desire for warmth was universal. Draw the curtains, and the world outside ceases to exist. Inside, the air grows still and warm, scented with smoke and linen. A curious custom from Northern Europe describes families placing warmed stones or baked bricks beneath their bedding before sleep. Wrapped in cloth, they served as primitive hot water bottles. Another tradition speaks of dogs trained to curl at their owner's feet, literal foot warmers with wagging tails. You imagine those moments, the sigh of relief as someone slides under the covers, the muffled thump of a tail, the crackle of fire just beyond hearing. Academic debate lingers over how many hours people actually slept during winter. Some historians think they followed the natural rhythm of darkness, sleeping in two phases separated by a quiet waking period around midnight. During that interlude, they prayed, tended fires, or whispered stories before drifting back to dreams. The idea of a single long sleep, so natural to us, might have been alien to them. You picture the house at midnight. The fire glows faintly, sending slow shadows across the beams. The air feels heavy but warm. A few quiet snores rise from the bed, mingled with the gentle breathing of animals. Every sound seems amplified. The pop of an ember, the shifting of straw, the wind brushing against the thatch. In that stillness, the cottage feels like its own small universe, sealed against the night. A bit of forgotten trivia hides here. In some places, people sprinkled dried mint or wormwood between bed layers to repel fleas and lice. The scent must have been sharp and clean, a rare luxury when bathing was infrequent. The herbs gave a touch of freshness to an otherwise smoky world, and perhaps even a small sense of dignity amid hardship. If you lift your gaze toward the ceiling, you can see faint drips of condensation glistening in the firelight. The moisture from many bodies and the hearth's heat meet the cold that presses from above, forming tiny beads of water that fall now and then with a soft patter. It is a rhythm you might grow used to after a while, like rain on canvas. Many researchers suggest that sleeping in groups was not just practical but deeply emotional. In a life where days were short and work was endless, the warmth of family at night offered more than heat. It was a reminder of belonging, of shared existence in a world that often felt indifferent. In that sense, every bed was a hearth of its own. The air cools slightly as the fire sinks lower. The father rises, adds a log, and checks the door latch. His movements are slow and silent, performed countless times before. He pauses to listen, ensuring that all are safe. The glow reflects in his tired eyes as he settles back down. The dog shifts closer to the warmth, sighing deeply. Outside, snow continues to fall, the flakes so fine they resemble drifting ash. The roof creaks occasionally, releasing a puff of powder through the thatch. Inside, everything is softness. Straw, wool, breath, silence. You feel yourself growing drowsy, lulled by the steady rhythm of warmth and quiet. You realize that this is what coziness truly meant in the medieval world. Not luxury, not ease, but survival through closeness. A home was not walls and wood alone. It was every heartbeat shared under one blanket. The memory of such nights lingers through centuries, carried forward in the way we still seek warmth beside others, even when our fires are electric and our rooms sealed tight. The fire flutters once more, brightening the room just enough to show faces relaxed in sleep. The village outside is still, each house glowing faintly through its shutter cracks. In this moment, surrounded by soft sounds and fading light, you understand why people endured the cold at all. It made warmth sacred. The next morning begins with the brittle silence that follows a hard frost. You step outside and see the fields shining under a layer of silver, every stalk of grass encased in ice. Smoke curls from the cottage roofs again, rising into a sky so pale it looks like parchment. Inside, the hearths must already be alive, for without constant attention, the fires would have died overnight. In this world, to keep warm means to keep burning. According to surviving manor records and tax rolls, wood was one of the most valuable resources of the medieval year. Entire communities measured their wealth not in coins, but in cords of timber stacked behind the house. A family that had wood enough for the winter was secure. A family that ran short might not see spring. The need for fuel-shaped landscapes, trade, and even social ties. Forests were guarded as fiercely as gold. You follow a path that winds toward the edge of the village. There, you find a man cutting fallen branches with a slow, steady rhythm. His axe bites deep into the wood, the sound sharp against the still air. Each swing releases the clean scent of sap, a promise of warmth months away. His hands are red from the cold, his breath steady, visible. He pauses only to rub his palms together before resuming. The pile beside him grows inch by inch. Archaeological studies reveal that medieval people burned a wide range of fuels, adjusting to whatever the land offered. In forested regions, oak, ash, and beech were prized for their slow, hot burn. In open plains, people relied on peat, a dense brown turf cut from marshes and dried in the sunday. The smell of peat smoke was thick and earthy, clinging to clothes for days. In some coastal towns, even seaweed was dried and burned, its sharp scent mingling with salt and brine. One rather curious fact comes from 13th century English households. Servants were sometimes sent to collect the small branches that fell naturally from trees after storms, called windfall wood. It belonged to the lord by law, but peasants often gathered it secretly at night, muffling their footsteps with rags to avoid detection. To be caught with an armful of sticks could mean fines or worse. Warmth had its risks. Experts interpret this obsession with fuel as more than necessity. It was a rhythm that bound the seasons together. In spring, families cut and stacked logs to dry through summer. In autumn, they rechecked their stores, resplitting what was too thick, patching roofs over the woodpiles. Winter was the test, the reckoning. Every log burned brought them one day closer to spring. A curious tale from Icelandic sagas tells of families who counted their wealth not in livestock, but in fire days, the number of days they could afford to keep a fire burning. A single log might be cut into thin slivers to stretch that count. Fires were banked carefully each night, covered in ash to smoulder until dawn. The art of tending the fire was as vital as the fire itself. You walk further and find a group of villagers digging into a low hillside. The soil turns darker and wetter until they strike peat. They work in silence, slicing blocks with long spades and laying them out in neat rows to dry. The smell is pungent, damp, ancient. One of them grins at you, his face streaked with mud. When the wind blows, the peat will dry into hard, crumbly bricks that can burn for hours. This, too, is the scent of survival. Researchers remain uncertain how families rationed their firewood. Some argue that every flame was calculated, that cooking and heating followed strict patterns of conservation. Others think that, when possible, people burned generously, turning their homes into glowing refuges in the long dark. You can imagine both. There are nights, surely, when one extra log feels worth more than a coin. A delightful oddity recorded in French manorial documents mentions that some households mixed dried dung with straw to form fuel cakes. They burned slowly and gave off a surprisingly steady heat. The smell must have been unpleasant, but necessity dulls the senses. For the poorest, warmth mattered more than fragrance. Back in the village, you notice how the hearth smoke rises lazily into the cold. The entire settlement smells of wood, peat, and slow-burning embers. Children carry small bundles of sticks in their arms, proud of their contribution. The older ones tend to the charcoal pit outside the fields. You approach it carefully, a mound of earth and ash that breathes faintly, exhaling grey wisps into the air. Charcoal burns hotter and cleaner than raw wood, but it requires constant watchfulness. Too much air, and the pile flares to ruin. Too little, and it smothers. According to evidence found in medieval charters, charcoal burners lived semi-nomadic lives, moving through forests and sleeping beside their slow fires. They were both respected and feared, for their trade held an element of mystery. The glowing pits at night looked like breathing creatures in the dark, alive but silent. Stories spread that the burners spoke with fire spirits who guided their hands. Whether true or not, their skill kept towns alive through winter. The man with the axe finishes his work and gathers the split logs into a rough bundle. His breath steams as he hefts it over one shoulder. You follow him back through the village. Everywhere, you see wood stacked carefully along walls, arranged by size and dryness. The ends of each log are marked with frost, the grain visible like lines of age on a face. Each piece holds the memory of its tree, its strength now devoted to human warmth. Some researchers believe that this intimacy with fuel shaped the medieval sense of time. Fire taught patience. Wood gathered in summer did not serve until winter. Peat cut in autumn burned best a year later. Every act of warmth was delayed reward. There was wisdom in waiting, in tending, in respecting the slowness of nature's gifts. As evening descends again, you watch the villagers light their fires. One by one, the cottages begin to glow, small orange dots in the vast grey landscape. From above, the scene must look like a constellation made of hearths. The air fills with a faint hum, a chorus of crackles and sighs. Inside each house, life continues. Bread baking, laughter rising, warmth blooming against the cold. You linger outside one doorway, feeling the heat escaping faintly through the wood. It smells of pine and peat, a sweetness touched with smoke. You close your eyes and breathe it in. This, you realize, is the scent of comfort earned, of labor transformed into light. Tomorrow, the woodcutter will return to the forest. The charcoal burner will tend his mound. The peat diggers will check their drying stacks. The rhythm never ends, because winter never truly leaves. It only retreats long enough to let the next harvest of warmth begin. The smell of smoke and cooking draws you back toward the heart of the village. It is late afternoon now, and from every chimney drifts the scent of something rich and heavy. In a world where food is both fuel and comfort, the act of cooking becomes a kind of quiet ritual. You step through a doorway and feel warmth roll over you in waves. The fire has been fed, the pot is simmering, and the air carries the slow heartbeat of survival. According to medieval household accounts, most meals during winter were made in a single pot that hung from a chain above the fire. This was the cauldron, the steady companion of every family. Into it went whatever was available: barley, cabbage, leeks, beans, bits of salted meat or dried peas. The longer it cooked, the thicker it became, until it was no longer soup but a kind of living stew. The same pot might be kept going for days, replenished as ingredients ran low. Some chroniclers even joked that a village stew could be older than the children eating it. You crouch beside the hearth and listen to the gentle bubbling. The smell is dense, smoky, and faintly sweet. Each pop of a bubble sounds like a sigh. The cook, a middle-aged woman with hands roughened by work, lifts the lid and stirs with a wooden spoon that has seen 1,000 fires. She tastes, adds a pinch of salt from a pouch tied to her belt, and smiles slightly. There is comfort in repetition. Archaeological studies of soot patterns on hearthstones reveal that cooking fires burned almost constantly through the colder months. When the flames dwindled, the embers were banked and covered with ash, still hot enough by morning to reignite the day's meal. That continuity made the kitchen the center of time. Every day began and ended with a spoonful of warmth. One rather amusing note from monastic kitchens tells of cooks who used bread as both spoon and plate. They called these trenchers, thick slabs of stale bread that soaked up meat juices. When they became too soft to hold, they were fed to pigs or given to the poor. Nothing was wasted, not even the crumbs. You watch as a child carries in a bucket of water from the well, her cheeks bright with cold. The water steams slightly as it nears the fire. She pours it carefully into the pot, and a new hiss rises, filling the room with warmth and scent. The sound alone feels nourishing. Experts remain divided about whether medieval cooking was truly monotonous or surprisingly varied. Some argue that peasants lived on endless gruel and pottage, while others point to surviving recipes that mention spices, herbs, and even imported ingredients like pepper or saffron in small amounts. It is possible that even the humblest homes experimented with flavor when the harvest was kind. You can almost taste the smoky richness of a stew thickened with rye flour, or the earthy bite of leeks picked before the first frost. Here's a small but curious detail. In some northern villages, families saved the layer of fat that formed on top of cooled broth and used it as lamp fuel. The same pot that fed them also lit their nights. The idea that food could glow as well as warm feels oddly poetic. The cooking space itself is organized chaos. You notice hooks, skewers, and iron tripods arranged beside the hearth. Flat stones serve as baking surfaces, and clay pots rest in the ash to slow-cook grains. The smell of fresh bread mingles with smoke, creating a fragrance that could make any traveler stop in his tracks. Bread is life here. Each loaf represents labor, patience, and fire. In wealthier homes, baking took place in communal ovens shared by the village. You imagine the scene. Women carrying dough wrapped in cloth, gossiping as they wait for the oven to heat, marking their loaves with unique patterns so they could find them later. The warmth of that space must have been intoxicating, both physical and social. A lovely bit of forgotten lore claims that people sometimes left small offerings near their ovens to ensure good baking. A coin pressed into the clay, or a pinch of salt whispered over the embers, might earn the favor of a household spirit. Whether superstition or simple gratitude, it reminds you how magical fire seemed before it was ordinary. Modern researchers have found traces of herbs like thyme, sage, and parsley in medieval cookware, suggesting that even peasants knew how to flavor wisely. A handful of herbs could mask the sourness of old grain or the salt of preserved meat. They cooked not just for hunger but for comfort. The fragrance alone could lift spirits after a frozen day. You sit near the hearth and let your imagination follow the rhythm of the meal. A child hums softly, the spoon clinks against the pot, and someone laughs in the shadows. The stew thickens until it looks almost solid, and the smell is irresistible. When the bowls are filled, everyone gathers close, blowing gently on each steaming mouthful. The sound of shared eating is quiet and tender, punctuated by the crackle of the fire. Academic opinion remains divided about whether mealtimes were solemn or lively. Some believe families ate in silence, saving breath and warmth. Others imagine conversation, songs, and prayers filling the dark hours. You suspect both were true depending on hunger, mood, and weather. Even silence, after all, can feel communal. When the meal is finished, the pot is left by the fire to simmer for tomorrow. The spoons are rinsed with a little hot water, and the scraps fed to animals. The room smells of wood, meat, and steam. You can almost hear the slow settling of satisfaction, the lull before sleep. A final detail catches your eye. A piece of bread hung by the door. Some say it was to keep evil spirits from entering, others that it simply dried for the next meal. Either way, it hangs there quietly, a symbol of life continuing, of warmth persisting against the cold. As you step outside, the air greets you with its sharpness. The snow has stopped for now. Across the village, other fires glow, other stews bubble, other families lean close to their hearths. The scent of cooking drifts through the night like a promise. Every cottage breathes, every home is alive, and somewhere beyond the hills the winter deepens. But here, you feel only warmth. Night has settled completely, and the village seems to exhale. You stand outside for a moment, feeling the soft weight of snow on your shoulders, the distant hush of wind through bare branches. The only light comes from the cracks beneath the cottage shutters, each one flickering gently. You step inside again, careful not to disturb the quiet. The fire glows low, and the room feels alive with its own slow rhythm. The sounds of medieval winter nights are a kind of music. You hear the occasional pop from the hearth, the soft movement of straw underfoot, and the faint hum of someone's breath. The darkness outside presses close, but inside, everything is safe, warm, and contained. This, you realize, is when imagination awakens. The night belongs to stories. According to collections of medieval folk tales, people told stories beside the fire to fill the long hours after dusk. They spoke of saints and spirits, of kings and farmers, of miracles and monsters. Some stories taught lessons, others simply passed time. The telling itself mattered more than the tale. The cadence of a familiar voice, the comfort of laughter, the crackle of wood, all these made the cold forgettable. You sit near the hearth and let your eyes adjust. The flames throw shadows across the walls, long and fluid. The shapes move like living things. A kettle hums softly over the embers, and the steam curls upward in thin spirals. You can smell iron, smoke, and something faintly sweet, perhaps honey warming near the fire. One fascinating discovery from excavated cottages is the number of charred animal bones found around hearths. They suggest that fires doubled as disposal pits, places where daily life and ritual mingled. People believe the crackle of bone in the fire kept evil away, a sound that frightened wandering spirits. You listen now, and in the faint hiss of a burning log, you almost hear the echo of that belief. The house breathes. The walls creak softly as they adjust to the cold. A draught slips under the door and curls through the room like a sigh. The dog by the hearth lifts its head, sniffs, then settles again. The air carries the scent of wood ash and wool, something deeply human. A curious record from an English manor diary mentions that families often left a small portion of food by the fire overnight, for the unseen guests. Some said it was for the spirits of the dead, others for wandering travellers who might find the door unlatched. Whatever the reason, the gesture spoke of humility and hope. Even in scarcity, they believed in sharing warmth. As you listen to the quiet, you notice the layers of sound that make up a medieval night. Outside, snow slides from the roof with a soft thud. Somewhere nearby, a cow shifts in its stall. The timbers moan faintly, expanding and contracting with the fire's rhythm. To live here is to sleep beside the voice of your house. Modern researchers studying the acoustics of reconstructed cottages found that the combination of low ceilings, thatch, and smoke created a muffled, cocoon-like soundscape. Every noise was softened, every echo absorbed. People might have whispered not from fear, but because their world itself was gentle, hushed by design. There is an old superstition that says one should never let the fire die completely after sunset. A live flame meant protection, and its light guided friendly spirits home. You imagine the father rising quietly in the dark, stirring the coals with an iron rod, watching until he sees a spark. The room brightens for a heartbeat, and he sits back, satisfied that the night is safe again. A small, forgotten fact, preserved in letters from the 14th century, tells of families who covered the hearth with a flat iron pan when sleeping, not only to prevent sparks, but to keep the embers alive until morning. The first person awake would lift the pan, stir the ashes, and coax the coals into life. The sound of that first breath of flame, the soft whoosh as it caught, must have been as comforting as a prayer. Some researchers believe these nightly rituals helped shape the medieval sense of time. In a world without clocks, people marked their days by light and fire. Morning began when embers stirred, evening arrived when the flames dimmed. The rhythm of living followed the heartbeat of the hearth. You lie down on a bench near the wall, feeling the heat drift upward. The light flickers across your closed eyes. The warmth touches your skin, soft and steady. For a moment, you imagine yourself as part of the story being told, a traveller resting in a stranger's house, safe from the wind outside. You can hear the whisper of an old tale about wolves in the forest, or about a saint who tamed frost with a single prayer. The storyteller's voice fades slowly, blending into the hum of the fire. There's a small sparkle of humour in some of these tales. People love to laugh at the cold, to make it smaller by mocking it. One folk tale speaks of a farmer who outwitted winter by pretending to invite it for supper, only to lock the door once it entered. The moral was simple: warmth belongs to the clever. Experts continue to discuss how these long winter nights shaped community. Some believe the shared storytelling built stronger family ties. Others that it created collective memory, binding generations through words spoken in the glow of fire. Whatever the reason, the result is the same: connection. The hour grows late. The fire settles into soft red light. The cottage is quiet again, except for a faint crackle. Outside, the wind hums softly around the roof, playing a tune only the night can hear. Inside, the warmth feels like a slow heartbeat, steady and reassuring. You close your eyes for a moment and let the rhythm of this place wash over you. The sound of fire, the smell of smoke, the softness of straw, the weight of the blanket, all these things weave together into something timeless. The medieval night, with all its silence and flickering shadows, becomes less distant, more familiar. It is not just history, it is the echo of every quiet evening that ever was. Morning comes slowly inside the thick walls of a stone hall. You wake to the sound of muffled footsteps and the faint clatter of metal against stone. The air feels heavier here, colder in a different way. This is not a peasant's cottage, but the home of the powerful, a manor or castle, built as much for defense as for comfort. Yet even in such grandeur, warmth is a fragile thing. According to records of royal households, great halls were vast open chambers with high ceilings and stone floors that swallowed heat as quickly as it was made. Fires blazed in enormous hearths at the center of the room, but their warmth rarely reached the far corners. Servants hurried with bundles of wood to feed the flames, and smoke drifted upward toward a hole in the roof. On cold mornings, frost still formed along the inner walls, glittering faintly in the firelight. You step forward across the flagstones, your breath visible in the dim light. The fire roars, and sparks leap toward the beams high above. Around it, life begins. The Lord's household stirs, servants sweep ashes, dogs stretch near the warmth, and the cook shouts for water from the kitchen below. You can smell roasted meat, even this early, mingling with the faint tang of burning oak. Archaeological evidence from castle remains reveals that tapestries and woven hangings were more than decoration. They trapped air and softened draughts that slipped through cracks in the masonry. The richer the lord, the thicker the fabric. Some were lined with wool or fur, turning the cold stone walls into something almost gentle. When you touch one now, it feels heavy and faintly oily from years of fire smoke. One curious report from a medieval visitor's journal describes how nobles sometimes moved their entire beds closer to the hearth during winter, dragging them each evening to capture more heat. The servants followed, carrying embroidered curtains that surrounded the bed on all sides. Inside those curtains, the air grew warm and close, scented with perfume and candle wax. Outside, the hall remained cold enough to mist your breath. You glance upward. A wooden screen separates the sleeping areas of the lord and lady from the main hall. The idea of privacy is still new here, but even the faintest barrier helps hold warmth. Above that screen, smoke curls lazily toward the rafters. The smell of burning pine fills the air. Researchers continue to debate whether castle life was more comfortable than peasant life during deep winter. Some claim the stone walls offered better protection, while others argue that their sheer size made them impossible to heat. A peasant's hut, small and smoky, might have felt far cozier than this grand hall filled with draughts. You can feel both truths here: splendor and chill, abundance and emptiness. An unusual detail from 14th century household accounts reveals that servants often slept near the kitchen, where the heat from the ovens lingered. The stone corridors between sleeping chambers were so cold that even the dogs refused to walk them at night. A boy would rise before dawn to light rush torches, guiding the household through the gloom. The hiss of his footsteps echoed down the hall like a memory. The fire remains the center of life even in this place of wealth. People gather close to it just as villagers do, sharing warmth and gossip. The difference lies only in scale. Instead of one pot of stew, there are platters of roasted game. Instead of a wooden stool, there are carved chairs lined with fur. Yet the need is the same, the yearning identical: to feel heat on the skin, to hold a cup of something hot, to forget for a moment that outside lies frost and hunger. A delightful oddity found in courtly records tells of nobles burning aromatic herbs, amber, or even imported resin to scent their halls. The fragrance masked the smell of smoke and added a note of luxury. Some believed certain scents protected against sickness. Others burned them simply because they could. You imagine the air thick with the mingled smells of rosemary, pine, and wood ash, a perfume of privilege and cold. According to contemporary chroniclers, the walls of some castles contained built-in flues that carried heat from fires below into upper chambers. It was an early experiment in central heating, clever but inefficient, The stones warmed slightly, then cooled again by midnight. Still, the idea itself was remarkable, proof that even then, people dreamed of conquering winter more completely. You wander toward the great fireplace, drawn by its immense glow. The logs inside are the size of small trees. A servant uses an iron hook to shift them, sending up a burst of sparks that dance across the soot-darkened chimney. The heat reaches your face, and for a moment it feels alive, almost sentient. Some researchers believe that the layout of the medieval Great Hall shaped social order itself. The closer you sat to the fire, the higher your status. At the outer edges, servants shivered, while the lord's chair stood directly beside the hearth. Even warmth had hierarchy. You imagine the subtle shuffle of chairs as people edged closer whenever they could, pretending not to notice. You climb a narrow staircase that spirals upward to a small chamber above. The air grows colder with each step. At the top, you find a private room with a small fireplace, its embers faint. A narrow window lets in pale light. The bed is draped in thick hangings, embroidered with golden thread. When you touch the fabric, it feels heavy and smooth, still faintly warm from the body that slept within. Historians believe that such rooms were both refuge and trap. The thick curtains kept warmth in but also shut out sound and air. Many who lived in these upper chambers awoke with headaches from the smoke and lack of oxygen. Yet it was better than the icy stone corridors just beyond the door. Outside, snow begins to fall again, soft and persistent. The castle walls absorb the sound until all you hear is the faint sigh of wind through the arrow slits. Inside, servants hurry to close the shutters and pile more logs by the hearth. The hall glows brighter, and shadows retreat a little. You sit beside the fire, watching how the flames reflect on polished goblets and the silver edge of a knife. The warmth feels the same here as it did in the peasant cottage. The difference lies only in the stories told beside it. Power cannot change the nature of fire. It gives, it consumes, it comforts. And no matter how grand the room, the flicker of flame always calls people closer. The world outside lies frozen, but within the monastery walls, the rhythm of life continues in quiet certainty. You step through an arched doorway into the cloister, your footsteps echoing against stone worn smooth by centuries of sandals. The air smells of wax, damp stone, and faint incense. Snow dusts the open courtyard, yet the monks walk calmly, their brown robes brushing the ground as they move from chapel to refectory. Here, warmth is found not only in fire, but in order. According to surviving architectural plans, monasteries were among the most carefully designed complexes of the medieval world. Every corridor and cell had purpose. Builders aligned cloisters to catch sunlight at specific times of day, and thick walls absorbed what little warmth the sun offered. Windows were small and deep-set, filtering the light into soft gold. The silence itself felt like insulation. You cross the courtyard and enter a room known as the Refectory, the warming house. This was the only heated space apart from the kitchen, reserved for the elderly and for monks whose tasks required writing or study. The fire here burns low but steady, its glow reflected on parchment and faces bent in concentration. The air hums with quiet scratching as quills move across vellum. Archaeological evidence from monastic ruins shows that these fireplaces were built with remarkable skill. Flues carried warmth through adjoining rooms, and vents controlled the draft. Monks who spent long hours copying manuscripts worked beside such fires, their ink warmed to keep it from freezing. The smell of ink and smoke became the scent of scholarship itself. One interesting note from a 12th century chronicle describes how monks dried damp sandals and robes by hanging them on rods above the fire. The result, according to the writer, was a scent of holy smoke that clung to the cloth for days. It may have been more comforting than divine, but perhaps both. You watch as one monk carefully stirs the embers with an iron rod. His movements are measured, deliberate, almost meditative. Fire, to them, is not a luxury but a discipline. They tend it as they tend their prayers, with patience and restraint. The warmth in this room is gentle, not indulgent, a reminder of balance between body and soul. Some researchers suggest that monasteries were early centers of architectural innovation. Their builders experimented with heating flues, water channels, and even primitive double glazing in the scriptoriums. The desire to preserve manuscripts from moisture demanded constant attention to temperature. In a way, knowledge itself depended on fire. A curious fragment of correspondence between abbots mentions disputes over firewood allocations. Each abbey had to ration fuel carefully, balancing devotion with comfort. Some stricter orders forbade fires in personal cells altogether, teaching endurance as virtue. Others allowed small braziers filled with glowing charcoal. The faint orange light from those coals became a symbol of obedience and restraint. You walk into the refectory next. It is vast, echoing but warm from the kitchen beyond. The smell of bread and broth fills the air. Along one wall, a single narrow fireplace flickers. Its heat hardly reaches the far benches, but the monks do not seem to mind. They eat in silence, their breath visible, their hands moving steadily from bowl to mouth. In this place, warmth is shared through rhythm more than temperature. An unusual practice noted by a traveller describes monks warming their ink pots by placing them inside hollow loaves of bread. The bread absorbed the heat of the fire, and the ink stayed fluid through the long, cold hours. It is a strange but ingenious image, the Word of God kept alive by a loaf of bread. Scholars continue to explore how these architectural choices reflected theology. Some believe the contrast between cold cells and warm communal rooms symbolized humility before comfort. Others argue it was purely practical, a response to fuel scarcity. Whatever the reason, the result is unmistakable. The monastery feels like a world apart, a sanctuary of calm discipline amid winter's cruelty. The sound of chanting drifts softly from the chapel. You follow it, drawn by its rhythm. Inside, candles flicker along stone walls. The air is warmer here, not from fire but from breath and devotion. The glow of the candles paints the monks' faces in gold, their voices blending into something both human and eternal. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the vibration of sound move through you. It feels like standing inside the heartbeat of the building itself. A record from an early Cistercian abbey mentions that during the harshest winters, the monks slept two to a bed, sharing warmth in silence. The rulebook did not approve, but compassion often outweighed discipline. No one spoke of it, but everyone understood. In that small act of mercy, faith met human need. Experts believe monasteries preserved more than books during the dark months. They preserved the culture of comfort itself, the making of candles, the crafting of wool garments, the careful tending of fires. What began as devotion became technology. When you trace your hand along the smooth stone of the wall, you feel that legacy in its quiet endurance. Outside again, snow drifts through the cloister. The sky glows pale violet. A bell rings softly, its tone clear and pure. The sound seems to warm the air for a moment. Somewhere nearby, the calefactory fire continues its steady pulse, a small flame in a vast world of frost. You realize that the monastery's warmth is not measured in degrees. It is measured in patience, ritual, and the constancy of human hands that never let the flame die. In this place, fire is prayer, and every spark is a word of faith. By the time winter has wrapped itself around the land, the rhythm of survival becomes a shared song. You walk through the village once more, and the cold feels softer now, as if it has been tamed by laughter, by the smell of baking, by the murmur of human voices. This is the season when warmth becomes not only physical but communal. It is the warmth of festivals, of neighbors gathered around shared fires, of stories that stretch deep into the longest nights. According to parish records and early festival calendars, winter was filled with feast days that broke the monotony of hunger and cold. Christmas, Candlemas, and even local saints' days were excuses to open the doors, share ale, and forget hardship for a while. In some places, Villagers moved from house to house with songs and torches, their voices echoing through the frozen air. You can almost hear it now, the rise and fall of music against the snow, rough but joyful. Inside a cottage, preparations begin early. The room smells of roasted grain and honeyed ale. A woman stirs a pot of pottage while children string berries onto thread to hang above the hearth. Someone sharpens a knife. Another hums an old tune about the turning of the year. Every motion has rhythm. Every sound a kind of celebration. One interesting note from manorial rolls mentions that during Yuletide, villagers were allowed to take extra wood from the Lord's forest without penalty. It was a rare kindness, a recognition that warmth itself was part of the season's mercy. Fires burned longer those nights, and even the poorest doorways glowed. The scent of pine and oak filled the streets like incense. A curious practice noted in rural France describes families keeping a Yule log burning for 12 nights. Each evening, a small piece was lit from the previous ember, symbolizing continuity and protection. The ashes were then scattered in the fields to bless the soil for spring. You imagine those 12 nights, the laughter, the glow, the unspoken hope that the coming year would be gentler. Historians find these winter festivals endlessly fascinating. Some believe they were remnants of ancient pagan rituals repurposed by Christian custom. Others think they were simply moments of human need, born from the desire to bring light into darkness. Whatever their origin, they remind us that even in an age of scarcity, people chose to celebrate. You step into the village square, where the ground is packed with footprints. A group of men raise a barrel of ale onto a sled, their breath clouding in the cold. Someone strikes a lute, and the melody drifts lazily into the air. The rhythm is uneven but warm. The women arrive with baskets of bread, and the children chase each other, their laughter rising higher than the music. It is not refinement that gives this moment beauty. It is life itself refusing to surrender. A delightful fragment of folklore tells of fire visits, nights when families would carry a small coal from their hearth to a neighbor's home, rekindling one another's flames as a gesture of friendship. The same fire that warmed one house would travel to another, symbolizing unity. The sight of people walking through the snow with glowing embers in covered pots must have looked magical, like stars moving across the ground. Academic discussions about these customs often focus on their deeper meaning. Some scholars argue that such gatherings reinforced the fragile social fabric of rural life. Others think they were simple survival mechanisms, a way to share food and fuel in disguise. But standing here, you sense that both are true. Warmth is always stronger when shared. As evening deepens, the villagers light torches and gather in a rough circle. Someone begins to tell a story, a long, winding tale about an ancient king who challenged the winter spirits and won by keeping his fire alive through 12 storms. The children listen wide-eyed. The adults nod in recognition. The story is older than memory, carried by generations like a flame passed hand to hand. A small but charming detail from an old sermon warns villagers not to dance too close to the fire during such feasts, lest sparks mark their clothing. Yet you suspect many ignored the advice. A bit of danger made the night more vivid, more alive. You can picture skirts twirling near the flames, boots stamping rhythm into the snow, the fire painting faces in golden shadow. Researchers studying the psychology of pre-industrial winters note that community gatherings reduced the fear of isolation. People needed each other as much as they needed heat. The glow of many bodies, the comfort of song and ale, the shared rhythm of feet on frozen ground, all these things warmed the soul as much as any hearth. You stand quietly, watching the villagers dance. The stars above seem close enough to touch, their light reflected in the snow. The music rises, laughter follows, and for a moment, the world feels young again. Every hardship, every hunger, every long night is forgotten in the shimmer of firelight and song. When the celebration finally fades, the villagers carry their torches home one by one. The square empties slowly, leaving behind footprints and the faint smell of smoke. Inside each cottage, a fire catches again, a small echo of the larger flame they shared together. The night grows quiet, but the warmth remains. You walk past the houses, listening to the muffled sounds of voices, the clink of mugs, the sigh of closing doors. The air is cold, but your heart feels full. In the distance, the church bell tolls once, clear and steady. The sound rolls across the fields like a promise. Even in an age of hardship, the people of the Middle Ages found ways to fill winter with joy. They danced, they sang, they built warmth from one another. In that spirit, you can almost feel the timeless truth of human comfort. That fire burns brighter when seen through many eyes. That laughter echoes longest in the cold. By now you understand that warmth in the medieval world was not just built into walls or kindled in fires, it was also woven, stitched, and layered onto the body itself. As the first light of morning touches the horizon, you see figures stepping outside, their shapes bulky and bundled. Clothing is armor against the cold, and every thread tells a story of craft, necessity, and quiet ingenuity. According to surviving guild records, wool was the heart of winter life. Flocks of sheep were prized as much as land, for their fleece became the difference between comfort and misery. You watch a woman carding wool near her doorway, pulling the fibers apart until they form a soft cloud. Her hands move rhythmically, gently, as though she is coaxing warmth out of the air itself. The fibers catch the pale sunlight, glowing faintly before they are spun into thread. The sound of the spinning wheel fills the morning air, steady and hypnotic. A strand of wool twists between her fingers, growing longer, stronger, ready to be woven. Archaeologists have uncovered countless spindle whorls across Europe, proof that spinning was as common as breathing. The hum of that work must once have filled every village, a background song of survival. In larger towns, weavers crafted cloth on heavy wooden looms. The process was slow and meticulous, each shuttle's knock marking another moment of life. Linen came from flax, tough and smooth. Wool was thick and soft. Fur was a luxury reserved for the fortunate. When the fabric was finally finished, it was soaked in warm water, pounded with soap, and sometimes brushed with teasels to raise a soft nap that trapped air. That texture was warmth made visible. A curious entry in a 14th century merchant ledger mentions the sale of night wool, a term used for thick, coarse fabric designed solely for sleeping garments and winter coverings. It was rarely dyed, usually grey or brown, but its roughness mattered less than its comfort. A heavy blanket of that cloth could turn a freezing night into something almost gentle. Scholars have often remarked that medieval fashion, especially in winter, was a careful dance between utility and modest display. Layers were everything. A linen shift against the skin, a wool tunic above it, then perhaps a cloak lined with fur or sheepskin. The wealthy favoured sable, mink, or fox. The poor relied on lamb or rabbit. When snow fell thick and fast, even nobles looked like bundles of moving blankets, their breath clouding beneath velvet hoods. One amusing note from a Norse saga describes how men stuffed dried grass into their boots before long journeys to keep their feet warm. The grass absorbed moisture and could be replaced daily. It sounds crude, but experiments by modern reenactors show that it worked remarkably well. A foot wrapped in wool and hay was a foot that survived. In some regions, people sewed small pouches filled with herbs like thyme or lavender into their collars and sleeves. The scent disguised the smell of smoke and sweat that clung to every garment through long winters. When someone passed you on a cold morning, their warmth carried faint traces of earth and flowers, a reminder that spring would eventually return. Researchers continue to debate whether clothing colors reflected status or simply personal taste. Some claim the poor wore dull browns and greys because natural dyes were expensive. Others point to evidence of bright vegetable pigments, reds, yellows, greens found in peasant textiles. You can imagine how those splashes of color must have brightened a grey village, like petals surviving through frost. A curious record from an English abbey mentions that monks were allowed an extra woolen robe during harsh winters. The rulebook stated that it was not for luxury, but for the preservation of life. Even in the strictest orders, warmth was recognized as divine necessity. The simple act of layering became a prayer in fabric. You watch as villagers gather for morning chores. Their cloaks flap lightly in the wind, edges rimmed with frost. Some tie scarves over their mouths to warm their breath. Children wear hoods so large that only their eyes peek out. Everyone moves carefully, conserving heat with each step. The cold is a presence, a silent guest that everyone acknowledges without fear. An endearing detail from a merchant's diary tells of travelling peddlers who sold warming stones wrapped in cloth. People would place them inside pockets or under cloaks during journeys. They stayed hot for hours when heated in ashes. Holding one now, you can feel the echo of those small, ingenious comforts that bridge the gap between hardship and hope. Archaeological discoveries of fur-lined gloves and woolen caps show that the concept of layering extended even to extremities. Hands were precious tools, and frostbite could mean ruin. A farmer's mittens, crudely stitched from sheepskin, and a noble's embroidered gloves both served the same sacred function: to preserve touch, to keep the ability to work, to feel. It is widely accepted that winter fashion defined social boundaries while also uniting people in shared necessity. The poor could envy the silk-lined cloaks of their lords, yet all of them felt the same cold biting at their fingers. Warmth was the one universal language, spoken through cloth, fur, and wool. As afternoon fades, you watch villagers return indoors. Cloaks hang beside hearths, steaming gently. The air fills with the rich smell of wet wool drying. It is not unpleasant. It is the scent of endurance, the smell of human presence pushing back against the chill. A final curious note found in household accounts describes how some families passed garments from generation to generation, repairing them endlessly. A child's winter cloak might once have belonged to a grandparent. Each patch carried memory, each stitch a story. You can picture hands mending by firelight, the soft murmur of thread pulled through fabric, the warmth of shared history sewn into every seam. As night returns, you wrap an imaginary cloak tighter around yourself. You can feel the layers, the weight of the fabric, the faint prick of wool against your neck. Outside, the snow falls silently, and inside, the fire hums. Wrapped in warmth both real and remembered, you understand why people treasured these garments. They were not fashion. They were love made visible. Evening descends again, and the air inside the cottage grows thick with the mingled scents of life. You stand near the door and breathe it in. It is not a perfume of comfort by modern standards, yet it holds a strange appeal. Smoke from the hearth mixes with the musk of wool and tallow, the tang of cooked vegetables, and the faint sweetness of herbs drying from the rafters. This is the smell of survival, of people and fire living side by side through the endless winter nights. According to surviving inventories from manor kitchens and townhouses, smell was something every medieval home learned to manage rather than erase. Fresh air was precious in a world of smoke and livestock. So instead of fighting the scent of daily life, people layered it with other aromas. Herbs, resins, and even animal fats became part of an unintentional alchemy of comfort. You look around the room and see bundles of thyme, sage, and lavender hanging from the beams, their colours dulled but their fragrance still strong. A woman crushes some between her palms and sprinkles the leaves into the rushes on the floor. When she walks, the scent rises faintly with each step, soft and green. Later, the herbs will dry completely, ready to be thrown into the fire to freshen the air. Archaeological traces of hearth ash reveal that families sometimes burned rosemary, pine needles, or bits of sweet flag root. The smell would linger for hours, masking the sharp edge of smoke. In monasteries, frankincense or myrrh added an echo of the sacred to everyday living. The same smoke that stung the eyes could suddenly feel holy. A curious note found in a 13th century household manual recommends boiling vinegar with sage and rosemary to clear the air of heaviness. The steam filled the room with sharp, clean fragrance. Whether it purified anything is uncertain, but it must have lifted spirits on dark afternoons. You notice a small candle burning beside the hearth. Its light flickers gently, the flame short and bright. The candle is made of tallow, animal fat poured into a clay mold around a linen wick. The smell is unmistakable, earthy and greasy, but familiar. In wealthier homes, beeswax candles burned cleaner and sweeter, their honeyed scent prized almost as much as their light. The air inside such rooms would shimmer with a golden glow, soft and fragrant. Some researchers suggest that medieval people experienced scent more vividly than we do today. With few competing odors from soap or perfume, each smell carried meaning. Smoke meant safety, meat meant celebration, beeswax meant prayer. The mind learned to read the air like a map of human life. One rather charming anecdote from a merchant's letter mentions that travelers returning from fairs brought home scented pomanders, small balls of wax or resin studded with herbs. They were hung near windows or tucked into clothing. A peasant might have one filled with cloves if fortune allowed, a rare spice said to ward off illness. To hold such an object was to hold warmth made tangible. The kitchen itself becomes its own world of smells. You can almost taste the smoke that has seeped into every utensil. A pot of broth simmers over the coals, the scent thick with onions and salted pork. Steam gathers near the ceiling, carrying with it traces of earth, iron, and life. In the corner, a man sharpens his knife, and the sound mingles with the soft hiss of the pot. The smell of metal and fat fills the space between them. An unusual superstition recorded in rural England describes people tossing bits of bread crust into the fire while cooking, believing that the rising smoke carried away sickness. It is easy to imagine someone repeating that gesture night after night, not entirely trusting it, yet unwilling to stop. Scholars have long argued whether these aromas, smoke, herbs, wax, and food were oppressive or comforting. Some think the air inside such homes was unbearable, while others insist it became the scent of belonging, a fragrance learned from childhood that meant safety and home. Standing here, surrounded by that invisible tapestry of smells, you understand how both could be true. A delightful piece of trivia tells that taverns near monasteries often scented their ale with heated pine resin during the coldest months. The sticky sweetness flavored the drink and filled the air with a sharp, clean scent. Patrons would leave reeking of both smoke and resin, proof they had been warmed twice over. You glance toward the bed in the corner. The straw mattress smells faintly of hay and sweat, but above it hangs a sachet of dried lavender and mint. Someone stitched it from scraps of cloth, a small gesture of comfort in a smoky world. When the breeze from the window stirs it, the fragrance drifts through the air, soft and soothing. Modern experiments in reconstructed medieval homes reveal that even with all the smoke, the air was rarely stagnant. The constant movement of fire, the cracks in the walls, the open roofs, all these created a slow circulation. The smoke clung to hair and fabric, but it also dried meat, cured hides, and discouraged insects. What we might call stench, they likely called safety. You close your eyes and breathe deeply again. The scent is thick, layered, alive. Each note tells a story. Pine for the woods where the firewood came from. Thyme for the fields harvested months ago. Tallow for the animals that gave their strength to the household. Every breath is a reminder that nothing here goes to waste, that even the air holds memory. The fire pops softly, releasing another puff of sweet smoke. The candle wavers, its wick almost spent. The room glows with a faint haze that blurs every outline into gold and grey. You realize that this, more than anything, is the feeling of medieval coziness, not clean, not sterile, but alive with the scent of everything that sustains it. When you step outside, the night air cuts sharp against your face. You can still smell the hearth on your clothes, the smoke clinging like a second skin. Behind you, the house exhales another curl of grey into the sky. It is not unpleasant. It is home breathing. It is deep night again, the kind where the stars look frozen in place. You sit quietly by the fire, and your ears begin to notice what your eyes cannot see. Sound, here, is not a distraction but a kind of companionship. In the medieval winter, the silence of the world was vast, and so every creak, every crackle, every sigh of wind carried meaning. The house itself spoke in whispers, and those whispers could be comforting or strange. According to diaries and rural accounts, villagers often judged the weather by the sounds their homes made. If the roof timbers moaned and popped, frost was tightening its grip. If the thatch rustled, a storm might be coming. The cold made everything musical. Even the snow outside had a voice, a faint crunch underfoot, or a distant groan as it shifted on the roof. You close your eyes and listen. The first sound is the hearth, steady and alive. Wood hisses as moisture escapes, a rhythm like distant breathing. Now and then, a log splits with a muffled crack, and embers tumble softly to the stones. The fire becomes its own language, the nightly conversation between flame and fuel. It tells you when to feed it, when to rest. Above you, the roof murmurs as the wind curls around it. The sound is low, like someone sighing through their teeth. It mixes with the faint flutter of thatch, the rustle of straw shifting in the rafters. The beams creak slowly, stretching like tired limbs. You imagine each sound as part of a symphony of survival. This is the voice of a living structure, breathing and settling against the weight of winter. Archaeologists studying preserved timbers from medieval houses discovered that some beams carry tiny burn marks along their edges. They call them ritual protection marks. People believed that the sound of wood cracking could be caused by mischievous spirits, and so they scorched patterns into the beams to keep the house quiet. Perhaps it was superstition, or perhaps it was comfort, an attempt to make the building a little less mysterious. A delightful detail from a Welsh folk tale tells of families who thanked their houses out loud at night. "Sleep well, old bones," they would say to the beams before going to bed. In their minds, a home was not an object but a companion, one that needed kind words to stay strong. You try it yourself in a whisper, and the creaking above seems to pause for a heartbeat as if listening. Outside, the wind changes direction. Through the walls you hear it sliding along the frozen ground, scraping over drifts of snow. The faint sound of distant animals drifts in the bark of a dog, the call of an owl, the lowing of cattle in a nearby byre. Every sound outside has weight in this quiet world. It tells you that life still moves beyond the walls, that even in the cold, the earth is never completely still. Scholars who reconstructed medieval houses once wrote that the sound of insulation itself played a role in comfort. Moss between timbers, rushes on the floor, and thick curtains muffled echoes, creating a soundscape that modern visitors described as velvet silence. Imagine that, a quiet, so complete it feels like a blanket. You could hear a pin drop, a whisper, even the slow settling of ashes in the hearth. You sit back and listen again. Someone in another corner of the house coughs softly, and the sound folds neatly into the rhythm of the night. The dog sighs in his sleep, claws scratching once against the floor. In the distance, water drips from the roof where the snow has begun to thaw just enough to run in slow drops. It hits a wooden bucket outside, pinging gently, each note perfectly spaced. The entire house seems to breathe in time with these small noises. Experts studying medieval psychology suggest that people found reassurance in familiar sounds. The creak of a beam, the murmur of the wind, the bubbling of a pot, all these meant life was continuing as it should. Silence, in contrast, could be unsettling, a sign that the fire had gone out or something had gone wrong. To sleep in total quiet was to sleep on the edge of danger. Here is a curious bit of trivia. Some households tied small bells to the latch of the door, not only to ward off intruders, but to hear the movement of the night. A gust of wind would ring them faintly, reminding the sleepers that the world outside was still turning. You picture the faint chime mixing with the sound of breathing and firelight, a lullaby of metal and flame. The voices of people add another layer. Families spoke softly at night, partly to save energy, partly because loud sounds felt out of place. A whispered prayer, a child murmuring in sleep, A story half told before fading into drowsiness, these created a rhythm that matched the pulse of the hearth. You can almost hear it now, words floating in the warm air like slow smoke. Some experts think that medieval people heard their environment in a deeper way than we do. With fewer distractions, their ears became attuned to every nuance. The change in wind direction, the crack of ice, the sigh of livestock. They knew the difference between a log collapsing naturally and one that meant trouble. Sound was their clock, their weather vane, their reassurance that they were still alive. You shift closer to the fire, feeling the floor's soft give beneath your feet. The rushes rustle slightly as you move. Somewhere in the thatch, a mouse scurries. You hear it nibbling, quick and secretive. Instead of annoyance, you feel only familiarity. The mouse is part of the night's orchestra too, another small life sharing the warmth. The air vibrates faintly as the wind rises again, brushing past the chimney. The flames respond with a low roar, brightening for a moment before settling back to their gentle hiss. The light flickers across the walls, making the shadows sway in rhythm. Every sound becomes a story, every creak, a memory of the day's labor frozen in wood and stone. You lean your head back and close your eyes. The sounds blend together until they become one vast, living hum. It is as though the house itself is singing softly to you, a lullaby made of smoke, wind, and time. In this song, there is no fear, only the calm of things enduring exactly as they should. Outside, the snow falls again, muffling the world into peace. Inside, the fire crackles one last time, steady and sure. You breathe deeply, surrounded by sound that feels like touch. The medieval night, far from silent, hums with warmth. The cold deepens until it feels as though even the stars might crack. You sit closer to the fire now, watching the shadows shift on the walls, and you notice something else moving quietly through the night: belief. In the medieval world, warmth and protection were never trusted to wood and fire alone. People filled the dark with charms, prayers, and peculiar remedies to keep frost and sickness at bay. The mind, after all, was another kind of hearth. According to early medical texts and herbal manuscripts, people believed cold was not just a sensation but a living force that crept into the body and soul. To fight it, they brewed strange mixtures of honey, wine, and crushed herbs. A popular tonic known as posset was made from hot milk curdled with ale and spiced with nutmeg or cloves if fortune allowed. It soothed the throat, warmed the belly, and carried the faint hope of protection. You can almost taste its heavy sweetness, thick as comfort itself. One old manuscript preserved in a monastery describes how villagers rubbed goose fat into their chests to keep out the chill. The belief was that warmth entered the body through the skin. Children glistened with it during winter, slippery as otters but safe from the frost. Whether it worked or not, it was an act of care, a way of saying, "I want you to live." A rather curious bit of folklore from Scotland mentions that people burned juniper branches at dawn on the first day of each new year, letting the smoke fill the house. The scent drove away illness and evil, and afterward, everyone stepped outside to breathe fresh air before breakfast. It was less about superstition than renewal, the idea that air, like the soul, must be refreshed. You glance toward the shelf beside the hearth. Small bundles of dried plants hang there: sage, yarrow, and angelica. These were the guardians of the household. A woman takes one down and crumbles it into boiling water, muttering softly. The steam smells sharp and green. She waves her hand through it, brushing the air toward the bed, toward the children sleeping beneath their wool blankets. The gesture is tender, a mix of habit and hope. Researchers studying medieval remedies find that many of these practices had some practical value. Honey soothed throats, garlic fought infection, and alcohol lifted spirits when daylight was scarce. Yet for every useful cure, there was one born purely of imagination. People tied red ribbons around their wrists to prevent chills, or placed warm stones under pillows to chase away nightmares. Healing, like heat, often began in the mind. An endearing story from village chronicles tells of travelers who carried small charms of iron to ward off winter spirits. The charms were sometimes shaped like tiny tools, a hammer, a horseshoe, or a knife. When held near a fire, the metal grew warm, and they believed the spirits could not touch them. Perhaps it was not magic, only comfort disguised as courage. Scholars have long debated whether such beliefs were remnants of older pagan customs or creative responses to hardship. Some say the people clung to magic because they lacked medicine. Others argue that faith, superstition, and experience blended naturally in a world where danger was constant. Either way, you can sense how these rituals turned fear into something tangible, something that could be faced. A delightful piece of rural wisdom advised drinking ale spiced with ginger and mustard seeds to set the blood aflame. You can imagine the laughter after such a drink, the way it must have burned and cheered them all at once. Perhaps the real medicine was the warmth of shared absurdity, the sense that doing something, anything, was better than surrendering to the cold. There are whispers, too, of darker charms. In certain regions, people buried a small loaf of bread under the threshold before winter began, offering it to spirits of the ground in exchange for mild weather. Others sprinkled salt into the corners of rooms to keep frost from crossing the threshold. It sounds fanciful now, yet even today, people hang talismans, light candles, whisper to luck. The impulse to protect remains the same. One scholar who studied medieval domestic rituals wrote that these acts created psychological insulation. Belief itself was a wall. When storms raged outside, people gathered near their hearths, clutching amulets, murmuring prayers, or simply holding one another's hands. The cold might break doors, but it could not easily break faith. You watch the family around you now. The father sips something steaming from a wooden cup, the smell of ale and honey filling the room. The mother rubs oil into her hands, whispering a verse from memory. The children sleep soundly, their cheeks flushed pink with heat and trust. Above them, sprigs of evergreen hang from the rafters, a promise of spring. The fire crackles, reflecting in their faces like small suns. Outside, the wind howls briefly, rattling the shutters, but the sound passes. Inside, the flame stands firm, steady as a heartbeat. Every superstition, every charm, every whispered spell feels like a layer between them and the dark. Researchers studying the anthropology of cold climates suggest that rituals of warmth were as vital as physical fire. They gave people rhythm, comfort, and meaning. The act of brewing a tonic, lighting a candle, or muttering a blessing turned chaos into routine, and routine was survival. The air smells faintly of juniper smoke and beer. You close your eyes and feel the warmth soaking into your skin. Whether it comes from belief, fire, or both, no longer matters. What matters is that you feel it. The world outside may freeze solid, but inside this small room, warmth glows in every gesture, every story, every breath. As you drift closer to sleep, you hear one last soft sound. The woman's voice, low and gentle, whispering something like a lullaby. Perhaps it is a prayer, or perhaps it is simply gratitude for another night survived. Either way, it settles over you like a blanket, and you let it. The cold does not belong to one country alone. As you travel further in your imagination, the map of medieval winter widens. You see snow-blind landscapes of the far north, fog-heavy valleys of the Alps, and frozen plains where wooden houses gleam with frost. Each culture faced the same enemy and answered it with its own kind of genius. You feel the unity of need beneath the differences of language and land. According to the writings of early travelers and merchants, Scandinavia was a lesson in endurance. There, winters swallowed the sun for months at a time. The people of Norway and Iceland built longhouses that seemed half buried in the earth, their thick turf roofs blending into the hills. Inside, the air was dark but warm, filled with the smell of smoke and wool. Families, livestock, and tools shared the same space. The walls, made from layers of timber and sod, trapped heat so well that snow sometimes melted on the roof even in midwinter. Archaeological findings from Icelandic farms show that hearths were long and central, stretching down the middle of the room. People slept in alcoves carved into the sides, their heads turned toward the fire's glow. The rhythm of crackle and hiss was the rhythm of life itself. The air inside those houses must have been thick with the smell of peat and the sweet, damp scent of earth. It was warmth drawn from the ground, steady and deep. A curious note from a Norse saga tells of families hanging fish above their hearths to smoke them through the season. The rising heat preserved the food and perfumed the hall with a salt-rich aroma. Even necessity had its pleasures. When storms howled outside, that scent of fire and sea reminded them of survival. You turn your mind eastward, toward the endless white of medieval Russia. There, homes called izbas stood like squat wooden ships in a sea of snow. They were built of thick logs, the gaps sealed with moss and clay. Inside, the great oven ruled the room. It was not only for cooking but for sleeping, sitting, even healing. People climbed onto the wide top of the oven to rest, soaking up the stored heat of the day's fire. The warmth seeped into their bones, slow and comforting. Some researchers describe the Russian stove as one of history's most efficient heaters. It burned little wood, but radiated for hours. Children and elders often slept directly above it, while cats curled in the corners, purring like small engines. The air smelled of bread and pine resin, thick and familiar. Even the poorest could feel rich in that glow. In the mountainous heart of Europe, the Alpine villages had their own wisdom. Houses were built of heavy stone on the ground floor and timber above, combining strength with insulation. Animals were kept below, their body heat rising through the floorboards. Above them, families slept snugly under wool and fur, warmed by the life beneath their feet. The night carried the low music of cows shifting in their stalls and bells clinking softly. One delightful detail from Swiss folklore describes families storing apples and herbs in the rafters through winter. The scent drifted down as the fire warmed the air, filling the house with sweetness. They called it the smell of tomorrow, a small reminder that spring would come again. Historians who study architecture across these regions often speak of adaptation as art. Every climate, every terrain produced its own rhythm of warmth. The same principles repeated: low ceilings, shared spaces, thick walls, and the magic of fire. Yet the materials changed with the land turf in the north, logs in the east, stone in the mountains. In every case, people built homes that mirrored their landscapes, turning the cold itself into part of their design. In northern France and England, homes grew taller over time, chimneys rising like proud towers. In Italy, where frost visited only rarely, people built wide hearths for cooking but left the windows open to light. In the farthest reaches of Scandinavia, snow buried the world to the eaves, and warmth came from shared breath more than brick or wood. The details differed, but the spirit was the same: make do, hold fast, and keep the flame alive. A lovely and little-known fact from the Finnish countryside tells of families storing glowing coals inside hollow logs when they travelled between villages. The coals could smoulder for hours, ready to rekindle a fire at journey's end. They carried warmth with them like a talisman, proof that home could be remade wherever the spark survived. Experts often note how architecture followed belief. In Russia, warmth was sacred, and the oven became almost an altar. In Scandinavia, the hearth was the seat of ancestors, the centre of household luck. In Central Europe, a fire burning through Christmas night was thought to keep the devil himself at bay. To tend a flame was to protect one's soul as much as one's body. You picture these distant homes now, each one glowing against the endless dark. A Norse hall humming with voices, a Russian izba filled with quiet laughter, an Alpine farmhouse wrapped in snow. Their smoke rises into the same sky, curling upward like prayers from different tongues joining in one silent chorus. Scholars often remark that winter shaped community as much as geography did. Where the cold was fiercest, cooperation was strongest. In northern villages, neighbors shared wood and labor. In mountain towns, people built barns and roofs together before the first snow. A single warm fire was often the work of many hands. As the night deepens, you feel the threads connecting these distant worlds. The same instincts, the same gestures, stacking logs, tucking furs, lighting lamps, whispering goodnight to the fire. Across mountains and seas, the rhythm of human warmth beats steadily. Outside, the wind carries a scent of resin and salt, peat and smoke, as if all those ancient homes breathe together. You close your eyes and let their stories blend into one another. It no longer matters whether you stand in a turf hall, a log cabin, or a stone chalet. Everywhere the message is the same. To live is to warm, to gather, to endure. The snow drifts quietly against unseen doors, and far away, another fire flickers. The world sleeps beneath a vast blanket of white, and beneath it, 1,000 hearts keep burning. The first thaw begins almost invisibly. You wake one morning and the air smells different, as though someone has opened a hidden door beneath the snow. The wind still carries a chill, but it no longer bites. Instead, it sighs. Water begins to speak again, dripping softly from the eaves, winding down the muddy paths like new veins through sleeping earth. After months of silence, sound and scent return to the world. According to chronicles kept by monastic gardeners, the earliest sign of spring was the shift in the air around the hearth. Smoke that once lingered heavy inside now rises cleanly. The ashes feel dry, not damp, when stirred. These small things told them that the deep freeze was loosening its grip. The villagers noticed too. They opened doors for longer, lifted shutters to the light, and felt warmth on their faces that did not come from flame. You step outside and see the snow softening in patches, revealing the brown earth beneath. The roofs drip constantly, each drop falling with the gentle rhythm of a heartbeat. The village looks tired, yet peaceful. Every surface glistens with melting frost, and the sound of water fills the air like music. A curious note from a 14th century traveller describes the joy of washing clothes for the first time after winter. People carried buckets of meltwater to the stream and scrubbed furiously, laughing as if freed from chains. The water was icy, but it meant change, and that was warmth enough. Even the smell of wet linen drying in the weak sun felt miraculous. Inside the homes, fires burn lower now. The smoke thins to a light grey ribbon that curls upward lazily. Wood is rationed carefully. Spring demands patience. The villagers know that too much confidence can summon frost again, so they move slowly, keeping one foot in winter, one in the promise of renewal. Researchers who studied medieval agricultural cycles note that this time between frost and planting was one of relief mixed with hunger. Food stores were nearly gone, fuel nearly spent, yet the sight of thawed ground brought hope that outweighed all worry. You can almost feel that fragile optimism as you watch the villagers clearing paths, laughing at puddles, and squinting toward the Sunday. One charming custom recorded in rural England tells of families collecting the first drops of water from their roofs and sprinkling it across their thresholds for luck. They called it the blessing of the thaw. Children ran about trying to catch drips on their tongues, tasting the sky's return. The cold was no longer the enemy. It had softened into something kind. You walk toward the edge of the village where the fields stretch wide and uneven. The snow there is thinner, dotted with green shoots daring to emerge. Farmers stand quietly, leaning on spades, testing the ground with their boots. The soil is dark and smells of life. After months of white silence, that smell alone feels like music. Archaeological evidence from medieval farmsteads shows that people often repaired their homes as soon as the frost lifted. The thaw revealed cracks, loose stones, and sagging thatch. Men climbed ladders to patch roofs, while women daubed walls with fresh mud. The sound of hammers and laughter replaced the winter creak of settling timbers. Rebuilding was not drudgery, it was celebration. A small but telling entry in a village ledger records the distribution of leftover ash from the hearths. It was scattered on frozen paths to melt ice. or sprinkled on fields as fertilizer. Even the remnants of warmth were useful. The cycle of life folded neatly upon itself. Ash becoming soil, soil feeding firewood, fire returning to ash. Some scholars see this season as the true heartbeat of the medieval year. Winter tested endurance, but spring restored faith. The people did not speak of conquering the cold, only of surviving it well enough to greet the next Sunday. There was humility in that rhythm, a kind of wisdom we rarely practice now. You pause by a cottage and see a woman hanging rushes outside to dry. The fresh bundles will soon replace the old ones on her floor. The air smells of damp straw and thawing mud. She smiles when she notices you watching and says something about the year turning again. Her voice sounds soft, almost reverent. A delightful fragment of folklore from the Alps tells that when the first birds returned, villagers greeted them with breadcrumbs scattered on snow, whispering, "Bring warmth in your wings." Whether anyone believed it literally did not matter. The gesture was an offering to hope itself. Inside the homes, life begins to rearrange. Heavy furs are folded away, windows opened for longer hours, and herbs once hoarded for medicine are used freely again. The smoke that once clung to everything fades, replaced by the smell of damp air and soil. You can almost feel the relief in every breath. Historians note that this season also carried a hint of melancholy. After months of closeness, families who had shared one room began to drift back to their tasks outdoors. The long nights of shared warmth gave way to labor, noise, and distance. Yet even that separation was part of the cycle. Intimacy belonged to winter, renewal belonged to spring. The sound of dripping water grows louder as the afternoon warms. Each drop catches a bit of sunlight and falls like a silver thread. A rooster crows somewhere in the distance, its call sharp and bright. You listen, smiling. The earth, silent for so long, is finding its voice again. A chronicler once wrote that spring did not arrive in a single day, but rather in sighs and murmurs. You understand now what he meant. The thaw is not sudden. It is a slow unwrapping, a gentle release. The fire still burns, but its glow no longer feels like defiance. It feels like gratitude. As night approaches, the air grows colder again, but the fear is gone. The fire burns small and steady. The shutters open to the soft sounds of melting snow. You sit quietly, watching a single star appear above the horizon. The world feels lighter, as though it has been forgiven. The long winter is ending, and the people who endured it are stronger for it. The days grow longer, the snow becomes a memory, and the fires that once roared in every hearth now rest as gentle embers. You walk through the village one last time, the ground soft beneath your boots. The air smells of wet wood, young grass, and smoke fading into the distance. The cold has finally retreated, yet its lessons linger like warmth, still radiating from a stone long after the sun has set. According to letters from medieval households, this was the season of quiet repair. People mended roofs, scrubbed soot from walls, and opened their windows wide to let sunlight flood in. The smoke stains on beams and rafters became familiar friends. Reminders of nights survived. No one complained of the lingering smell of fire. It was proof of victory. You pause by a cottage and see a man stacking wood with care for the next winter. The sound of the logs hitting each other is steady and reassuring. He is already thinking ahead, because in this world, warmth is never assumed. It is earned anew each year. His movements are calm, unhurried, a rhythm that feels eternal. A chronicler from the 15th century once wrote that fire was the oldest friend of man, and the last he should forget. That truth lives in every blackened hearth and every pile of ash spread on the garden soil. The fire that began as defense became memory, and memory became tradition. Each home carried a story of its own endurance. You step inside one last cottage. The rushes have been replaced, the windows propped open to sunlight. The air is clean now, touched by the scent of wildflowers drifting from outside. A woman hums while brushing soot from the wall. Her voice is calm, and the sound echoes softly in the quiet room. On the table lies a candle made of beeswax, its scent of honey faint but distinct. The flicker of its flame feels almost shy after so many fierce months of burning. Researchers today often note how the medieval struggle for warmth shaped the way we think about comfort. The word cozy, they say, carries echoes of those long winters. The closeness of bodies, the smell of wool and smoke, the flicker of fire on rough walls. Every modern hearth, every glowing lamp, every cup of tea owes something to those ancient fires that refused to die. A lovely passage from an old folk prayer says, "May the flame you guard in winter guide you through the light of spring." It was whispered as the final ash was cleared from the hearth, part farewell, part blessing. You can picture a family standing together, watching the last curl of smoke rise, each one silently promising to keep the warmth within themselves. Historians sometimes argue that progress separated us from this intimacy with heat and hardship, yet others believe we still carry it, hidden in our habits. The way we gather around fireplaces, candles, or even glowing screens at night reveals that the human heart still seeks the same comfort, the meeting of light, warmth, and companionship against the dark. You wander outside again. The village has changed with the season, but its shape remains familiar. The same roofs that once glistened with frost now shine with sunlight. The same chimneys that coughed out thick smoke now send only wisps into the bright air. Children run across puddles where snow once lay, and dogs bark with the joy of open ground. A curious reflection by a medieval poet likened spring to the hearth of heaven rekindled. You smile at the thought. The sky does feel warmer, as if the world itself were drawing closer to the sun's fire after a long sleep. The ice of the river cracks, and the water flows clear and bright, carrying away the last traces of winter's shadow. Inside the homes, the hearths rest for now, but the ashes are not forgotten. People still touch the stones with fondness, still speak of how the fire burned brightest during the worst nights. Warmth, to them, was not just temperature. It was memory, skill, love, and faith combined into something almost sacred. As you walk past the last house, a faint breeze carries the smell of distant wood smoke from another valley. You realize that somewhere, someone else is lighting a fire, tending it carefully, watching it glow as their ancestors did. The thread of warmth runs unbroken through centuries. You stop at the edge of the fields and look back. The village glows in the afternoon light, its cottages small and strong. It is easy to forget how fragile each one once seemed under the weight of snow. Yet the proof of endurance stands right there in their sturdy walls and smoke-darkened beams. The people have survived, and in their survival, they have left behind a legacy far greater than stone or timber. They taught the world how to make warmth out of whatever it could find. You stand still for a moment longer, listening. There is no wind, no crackle of fire, only the faint hum of life returning. The season of ice has passed, but the feeling of the hearth remains, glowing softly somewhere deep within you. And as the light fades, you understand what the medieval winter was always teaching, that warmth is not only built, but shared, not only kept, but remembered. The story quiets now, as all nights eventually do. You can still feel a trace of the fire's heat on your skin, though the flames are gone. Outside your window, imagine snow melting into dark soil, the last breath of winter sliding gently away. The air smells clean again, soft with promise. Let your thoughts drift back through the journey you have taken. You have walked through smoke-filled cottages and stone halls, through monasteries humming with quiet prayer, and villages glowing with laughter. You have heard the creak of beams, the sigh of wind, the slow heartbeats of fires that kept whole families alive. Every ember you saw was a thread connecting you to those who came before, to hands that built warmth from soil, wood, and will. The world has changed beyond measure, yet the need to gather close, to feel safe beside light, has not. Even now, the glow of a lamp or the soft hum of a heater carries the same comfort. Somewhere inside each of us, a small medieval hearth still burns, whispering that the cold can be endured, that light is worth tending, So breathe slowly. Feel the calm settle around you like wool. Picture the old villages fading into twilight, their fires burning down to ash while stars appear overhead. The people sleep, the fields rest, and the night itself exhales in peace. You have reached the quiet part of history, where warmth is no longer a struggle but a memory. Keep it with you as you drift towards sleep, the sound of crackling wood echoing faintly in your mind. Good night, traveller of time. The fire is waiting, always.